Thanks. My name's Paul Smith. I run the public sector business unit, which includes all government and higher education. And I'd like to welcome all of you folks that are in our industry to our 12th Red Hat Summit. And I can echo some of the things that Paul Cormier was saying from stage, that it's, in the beginning, it was a little bit of a challenge to get some of you folks here for a lot of reasons. And I think where we are in the industry, where we've come to, is a real testimony to the fact that I think we have almost 275 people here, and we had to turn a lot of people away for this lunch. So hopefully the food's good. I wanted to take you a little bit down the path. We've got a nice agenda here this morning, a panel session coming up. I'm just going to give a little bit of context for that, where we've come from. But when I think of the power of participation in government, I think of we've come a long way, baby. I've been with the company now for about 12 years. For those of you that operate on in the private sector, that's just about 51 quarters. So all good, all good. Thanks to many of the folks in this room and the partners. But when I say we've come a long way, our early adopters, and many of those folks are in the room today, our early adopters for open source were research organizations and academia. So we'll actually have a chance to hear from some of those folks today, because in that community, so to speak, there's a real culture of sharing that existed. But our first real conspicuous mover, I think, that helped us with open source adoption in government and also in industry was an agency in Fort Meade, Maryland, by the name of the National Security Agency. And we actually have a representative from the NSA here with us today. But if you'll recall, some 12, 13 years ago, in a community project, Security Enhanced Linux was actually created in a community that included many partners, including Red Hat, but mostly the NSA, trying to drive security controls into the Linux operating system. And that was really kind of like I think the main catalyst for not only government adoption, but also for industry adoption. One of our best early customers outside of government and education was the financial community. And those communities really take it at high level of importance for security. So it was soon after, that imprimatur from the DoD, so to speak, that we've got hardened operating system that actually took off. So moving down the path in terms of adoption, sometime in 2003, the DoD released a memorandum on, proper use of open source. And soon thereafter, the Army actually deployed a Blue Force tracker into Baghdad on tactical units, to some 80,000 units. And Nick Justice, who was Colonel Nick Justice at the time, who was in charge of that program, quoted, he retired as a two-star just a couple of years ago, quoted, we rode into Baghdad on open source. So the DoD then really understood the benefits of agility and moving forth. And the civilian agencies in government for the next couple of years still operated with some interest, but a lot of them had still to use anything open source was primarily done by waiver. So then fast forward, the Navy then gets involved in an open source project with IBM and others, ourselves included, to create a real-time operating system for the destroyers, so they could have a single form factor on a shipboard, because they've got very limited space. So that was a really cool project. And then when we get into the very beginning of the Obama administration, we all sat around, I think Nathan and John Punzucker runs the state and local group, and Nathan Jones over here runs all of our federal group. And we swear they stole our slides, our pitches, because open government was all about collaboration, transparency, and what this conference is really about, participation. And it really took off in a great way. And it's kind of a lead-in to some of the great projects that then ensued. And most of you know that this project became a product called OpenStack. It was actually born out of another agency by the name of NASA. And NASA actually, back in 2008, created a project called Nebula. Some of you have heard of that. And the key goal there was to come up with some compute controls mechanisms so they could standardize their their web space and actually standardize all of their applications all on a single type of platform. But at about the same time, Rackspace was doing almost the exact same thing for storage. So they got together and OpenStack was born. And then soon thereafter, I think the community was really kind of tight between Rackspace and NASA. They were convinced, I guess, from best practices, we may play a role in that, in kind of opening up the community to a much wider audience. And the community around OpenStack absolutely exploded. So one of the things we like to talk about that, most recently, back in April, we announced a partnership with JPL, and this is public, that they've actually are using Red Hat OpenStack as their primary platform for infrastructure as a service. Now that's really kind of important because these were the folks that actually created this whole community, and they still are very conspicuous in their contributions to the community. But they've realized that to take it and operationalize it, there's another model that has to take place, and that's something I think Red Hat's done very well over the years. So that was just announced in April. And on the same lines, in terms of OpenShift adoption, you've heard a lot about OpenShift. I think there was a cool demo today that Burr and his crew gave. Do you guys think that was pretty cool? Did you kind of get it? I got about 10% of it. But the adoption in government in OpenShift and just managing platform as a service is growing wildly. And while I can't really talk about who, I'll give you some ideas that there's a large state in the Northeast that's actually set their standard around OpenShift as their platform as a service. There's a large airplane manufacturer that's done the same thing. Most of the health agencies, the finance agencies, the welfare agencies, and even the judicial agencies in our federal government have all standardized on projects around OpenShift. So you can probably guess some of those names, but they're not public on their references yet. But NASA, again, continues to lead in this area, and they're actually part of this large community of OpenShift Commons, which if you go to that website, openshiftcommons.org, you'll see there are hundreds and hundreds of members there. Amadeus is there. A lot of our customers are there. A lot of our partners are there. So you'll see that they continue to contribute. And this is the whole thing that's really exciting about where we've come from, in government anyway, from delivering technologies that are disrupting older IP into being on the leading edge, working with government to develop new innovations. So very, very happy about that. And one of our key states that you can take a look at right now in North Carolina, under the direction of Governor McCrory, he was looking at all of his websites across the state and saying, this is a mess. Our traffic is low. We're not getting information out to the citizens in a timely manner. And he created a mandate that he wanted to standardize all that. And they did standardize on OpenShift, but they delivered it in Amazon as a dedicated node. And since they've done that, they've created a better way. And they simplified their content creation. They simplified all their maintenance. They achieved all the goals that the governor really wanted for a lot of reasons, but their traffic is up almost 60%. They saved almost $1 million in operational expense, and they've really become focused on the mission for the developers rather than just the mundane actions around maintaining and creating a variety of different content managers. So what we have coming up next is Dave Egts, who's the chief technologist for our public sector business unit, is actually going to lead a panel of academia, industry, and government, and actually talk about how we are together, not only consuming open source, but actually participating in the innovation. So just as a quick little advertorial, this afternoon, we have a government breakout We've got ex-CTO from Energy, Pete Saronis, on a panel with the GSA, with one of our other great partners, CSRA, who just FedRamped at FSMA High their cloud offering. And they're going to be talking about, how government and state and local and education entities, so to speak, actually watch this a lot too, because it's kind of like the blessing that, okay, we've got a high level of security for these offerings. So we've got some great folks that are going to be talking about that this afternoon. And then tomorrow morning, we're really honored. The CTO from NASA has got the early morning keynote in the big room over in North. And that's Tom Soderstrom from JPL is here. So he'll be around here this afternoon as well, but we're real happy to have you guys. You've been on the leading edge for a long time, and really appreciate the partnership over the years. So with that, I'd like to ask Dave to come up and get this thing kicked off with our panel.
All right, so you guys having a good summit so far? Pretty cool? Yeah, so it's really interesting. I really like the theme for this year, for this summit, the power of participation. And what I was doing is I was listening, I was sitting in some of the sessions at DevNation and some of the sessions at the summit. And there are a couple of things I wanted to share with you guys before we turn it over to our panelists. One of the interesting things I saw, like when we think about participation, I saw a presentation by David Aronchik. He's a product manager for Kubernetes at Google. And he was talking about Red Hat's participation with Kubernetes, about how we've done a lot of the work with stateful application support and identity and authentication support. And those are the types of things that we are we think are very, very important, because for a lot of our customers, they can't go immediately to stateless applications. They have a lot of traditional applications that they want to move into a platform as a service, and we're able to do that by working together with Google. And one of the interesting things that David said is that he did the math, and he saw that it was 233 person years of contributions in the 24 months since the first commit of Kubernetes. 233 person years. And that wasn't all Red Hat. That was part of the larger community between Google, between Red Hat, and all the other contributors. So that was pretty cool. So, but you think about that, the power of participation, obviously Red Hat, yeah, sure, we're in open source. So that's something we do. That's what we do for a living. We have thousands of engineers that all they do is they write code and give it away as part of the community. But what about our customers? So I was over in the Executive Exchange, and I saw a presentation by Amadeus, and then I also saw Matt Hicks, who's our Vice President of Engineering for OpenShift. And between both of their sessions, Matt said that Amadeus was all in with OpenShift 3 from the very beginning of when it launched. Actually, and the reason why they were committed so early was that as a customer, they were actually a participant in the open source community with OpenShift Origin before we even came out with OpenShift 3. So this allowed, by them being a participant inside the community, allowed them to get to market faster, beat their competition by being part of a larger community than themselves. So I thought that was a really cool example of actually customers playing a role in that. And then one last thing that I saw was this morning from Paul Cormier, where he was citing the One Open Source survey, where he said that 78% of enterprises run open source. Okay, 78%. And then what really blew my mind was he said that 65% of these companies contribute to open source projects. So I did the math, and 65 divided by 78, that's 83%. Of the people that are consuming open source are actually playing an active role in contributing back. And so that, so as you guys are sitting here, it's like you should be thinking, it's like, okay, well, I've seen, it'll be 10 years in February since I've been at Red Hat. And I've seen the pendulum swing from people in government being skeptical of open source to consuming open source to being active participants. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Think about ways that you could participate in the open source community as well. Yeah, so with that, let me turn it over to our speakers. I have a really, I'm really excited about the lineup that we have. We're going to have a really nice cross-section of our panelists. So we got Chris Hampel, who will go first and tell us about the work that he's doing at Booz Allen Hamilton with his team. And then we have Amitav, who's from University of Michigan. Really, really interesting story about doing open data to help people not only answer questions, but figure out what questions to ask whenever they're doing scientific discovery. And then lastly, we have Jeff Blank from the NSA, who's going to tell us about a lot of the work that he's done with the SCAP security guide, as well as the work with common criteria, and doing those things in an open source way. So with that, let me turn it over to Chris, and do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks, Dave. My name is Chris Hampel, Booz Allen Hamilton. I lead up the Austin, Texas office, part of the Strategic Innovation Group. And really in Austin, we focus a lot on public cloud, private cloud, containerization, a lot of cloud brokering, service brokering work we do. Been doing a lot of data stuff lately. So a lot of things where we kind of trying to push the edges on things. And we do this been doing it for a lot of clients, both commercial and federal. Plus a bunch of other products that we've been working on. So part of those products is Project Jellyfish, which I'll be talking about. But we've also been doing things with containerization. We've been playing with SDN. What can we kind of push on and kind of knowing from working with our customers, where can we try to help move the market? And this is kind of one of the themes we've been working on a lot. So with Project Jellyfish, well, first of all, Project Jellyfish is really a open source cloud broker that we built. So it kind of sits on top of cloud management tools that delivers a pure self-service user interface. So our feeling is consumers are expecting a consumer experience. Let's deliver that user experience for cloud services. And we first did it really came out of some work we did for the Army a long time ago. And we started evolving this concept of brokering and really what was wanted and needed and creating these abstractions so that normal consumers can get at these services without being, going through an admin or doing these whole other processes. So we won a contract with a client, and Red Hat was part of that work we did for them, and we built a service broker application. And after that project, we realized, okay, we felt strongly about a number of things, but how could we kind of move this forward? So what we felt strongly about was one is the market we weren't happy with at the time. There were some good cloud broker type offerings, but they were all proprietary. We felt like open source was leading the way in a lot of areas, especially across IT. And that's where we thought the market needed to have this. So we said, okay, we definitely create something that addresses that need. How can we push the market forward? Secondly, it has to be open source. Third, we wanted that open source to be community-based. It wasn't just enough that we released the code. This, in our mind, especially with brokering that touches so many things, it's so hard for a particular vendor to do that outside of open source was our feeling. Just the rapid transformation of technology. You need these other communities to be engaged. So really kind of fitting into our theme of participation, that was critical for us up front. And it actually fits well for Booz Allen because one of our strengths is we have a lot of people and clients, so we hear a lot of use cases and needs, but we also have a lot of good partners that we can work with. So for example, Microsoft built the Azure connector for Jellyfish for us. And that was a perfect way for them to participate in us. And they've built the connector for CloudForms at that point since then. So we built Project Jellyfish, and then we decided, okay, we know we want to open source it. Booz Allen's never open sourced anything at that point. How could we do this? We'll figure that out. And that was a whole education process to kind of go through that. And we were successful. Leadership bought in, and it really helped that we had examples such as Red Hat to say we could point to models. Okay, this model does work. This is a good way to develop code. It's not just some dude in his jammies in his mom's basement anymore. This is something serious. So we decided, okay, let's do this, and we went through that process and open sourced it, and we ran with that, and we built community, but we really came back to our whole goal was, how can we as Booz Allen have an impact? How can we move the market forward? How can we deliver something we know our customers need that we're having trouble finding something that matches it? And our feeling is really that cloud management and the self-service broker, that really needs to be as integrated as tightly as possible. So we'd been working with Red Hat, and we started talking together and working things out where we ended up saying, okay, I think what makes sense for Booz Allen is and makes sense for the community is let's contribute. So we took that model and took a lot of our code and our developers to add self-service to cloud forms, the self-service UI. So bring the concepts that we felt was important and deliver those into the Red Hat model for that. And I think for us, really what's key with that was it fit in that our whole goal through the whole thing was, how can we participate? How can we move the model? How can we create things for our customers that's really what they need when we don't see it in the market? And if there's not that open source model, there was no avenue for us to do that. So by having this community model for us to be able to contribute, we can do something that's bigger than us, and then we can move on. So then we can take that next level and say, okay, we're great here. Where do we see the gaps? How can we tackle? So we're doing things, more containerization, more SDN, more other data-related things. And how can we kind of take that platform and iterate, do it again? Say, okay, here's where we're from our customers. We're not quite seeing this. How can we help? So we can work on that, and then we can fold that back into a larger model, because we don't really want to be, in the business of, we don't want to set up a whole separate company to do all this stuff. That makes no sense. So that power of community, I think, is really critical for a lot of our stuff. And we feel it kind of gives us an avenue to move forward and do new cool things. So that's kind of our story with Jellyfish, and I think it's been very fruitful, and it helps us in a lot of ways. One, it gives us a product that now we can say, okay, this is addressing your needs to our customers, but it also allows us to keep working on the new cool stuff, to be honest, too. So we can hire people. That's a lot easier from the talent I'm trying to get out of Austin. And these people joining in Booz Allen, they want to work on the new stuff, right? So it's great for us to be able to then have them do that and then have them be open source contributors. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So if people want to check out the Project Jellyfish website, where should we send them?
Yeah, projectjellyfish.org.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Amitabh.
Can people hear me?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. I am a supporting researcher at the University of Michigan, and we have been doing a lot of interesting projects that I'm going to talk about. But in particular, I want to talk about a product that we've been building called MedBuzz. And the challenge for us is we have over 300 data sources with health data, with molecular data, with genomic data, and we need it for our researchers to be able to use this data and discover new therapies and drugs. And so what we did was we looked around. We have a lot of vendors, including IBM, which is kind of our main infrastructure provider. But we found that there is we needed an open source, an open everything, an open science platform to develop against. And so what we have done is really worked in open source. We have open sourced our product, and also we want to engage in the larger change that is happening today, which is there is a shift from the traditional funding models to the new model where NIH is granting in a different way. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that process. So in traditional projects, when a grant was approved, it was a grant for the entire, dedicated to a PI, a principal investigator. And what this faculty would do was build up their infrastructure from ground up. So a lot of the dollars that they had in the grant was spent towards doing the same things over and over again. So we needed a different model where the NIH is sponsoring projects for different universities, different medical systems, health systems to come together and collaborate. An example of that is a national level project that we just got into the grant. It's called Patient-Centered Outcome Research Initiative. This is a nationwide initiative, and with the electronic health records rolling in, we still didn't have the ability to run queries across the nation. And this was preventing us from doing research on how do we know what factors are affecting our obesity, how do we know what factors are affecting our bone disease, things like that. So what we did was in this project is to bring a common data model that will allow whether you're Centricity or you're Epic Shop or what have you, to bring this data into a common format and then execute this query in a distributed fashion to be able to answer scientific questions. There are other issues around this problem, which is, with health, we have a lot of regulatory requirements. We can't just take the data and start running queries on it. There's a lot of processes that make sure that your research is legit, that you're allowed to do those researches. And in a traditional setting, when I'm as a researcher, I go and fill in my application for a study, and I get the data if I'm approved. But in a distributed, federated network across the nation, how do you ensure that your study gets coordinated across different nodes? So again, we had to think about this delegated IRBs, the institutional review boards. So those are all challenges that we ran into. But if you look at the bottom of this, there is a data play. We have to bring the data together, and we have to build processes to share that data in a distributed fashion. And what we did was this Medbus platform, this distributed model. We've used a lot of Java tooling and Linux on a clustered environment. And what we are hoping to do is to get participation both in terms of engaging in the project, but also get contributions to the project.
Okay. So I know you had slides. Do we want to? Is that good? Or?
I'll zip through the the slides, but I think I kind of covered all of them. But let me zip through, because I was looking for my clicker.
Okay, yeah. I know Allison was panicking a little bit.
So this is who I am. I have a background in computer science. I've been doing a lot of large-scale projects, and I'm a programmer as well, a polyglot, different languages. This is our university. That's where a lot of our hospitals are. But we have also many other facilities across. Let's see if this goes through. And this is kind of the size of our enterprise. In particular, I'm part of the research enterprise, 466 million, and operating budgets of 3.3 billion. And so there is a change, and what we wanted to talk about that change. And with change, there is obviously opportunities, and so we feel like we have made some impact there. And it's a great time to be a developer. And primarily in our space is the rise of computational techniques in the biology, where a lot of traditional wet labs where you put molecules and you put reagents and you found out what was happening, and now you're changing that into computational techniques. And obviously that requires a lot of processing, a lot of big data, that kind of thing. So we are thinking along those lines. And so NIH has these principles, the fair, the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible principles, and we are trying to. So this is where it is. If you look at the trend, it's open everything. And why is that? Not because of altruism, but because it's too slow otherwise. We just can't invent all this innovation, everything that Chris did. All I need to do now is to use his stuff, because he has not encumbered it. So I want to be able to use that. All right. So the major initiatives in the national landscape is learning health system, which is trying to close the loop between learning, practicing, and discovery, and then precision medicine, which is about medicine tailored for you. And you guys probably heard about Biden's cancer moonshot, and so that's a pretty major one. And for our world, the itself, we have a data science initiative, which is about $250 million, and we want to engage with the industry as well to build out that infrastructure. Part of that is the Google autonomous cars, so we are the testing site for that, and we're developing a lot of machine learning to do that. So I think I'm going to just zip through this. So new business models emerging. So my point here is there's a lot of opportunity here. For instance, pills that track. Today our problem is I may have prescribed you a pill, but did you take that? And so smart pills are coming, which are basically tracking, did you take the same dosage? Did it do the thing that it was supposed to do? So things like that are coming. And this is MedBus, so we built out this data integration in a box. Essentially, you plug in data sources from one end, and you get data on the other end. And remember, in our context, we utilized a JBoss product called data virtualization, and it's the coolest piece of machinery that I've come across. It basically takes you point your data to different sources, whether it's big data or a tiny little Excel spreadsheet, and then it manufactures tables out of that, so you can run your SQL queries against it. But not only that, it translates that automatically to services. And you can consume that. In our case, a lot of that is happening through R or SAS, where you can get the data and start doing your complex computations on it. So it allows us to industrialize our service delivery model. And this is all service-oriented architecture, so you can get it through RESTful services, or you can use JDBC, what have you. So I think the piece is we have identified a core key demand. We believe there is a solution. We need a lot of help in building this. We've just made the start, and I am hoping that I can get participation and help from this community here.
Thanks, Amitabh. So Jeff.
Yes. Hey, Dave. So, whoops, here we go. So, hi, I'm Jeff Blank. I'm a technical director within NSA's Information Assurance Directorate, which is, of course, NSA's defensive mission. I focus on security analysis of operating systems and application software in my current role. Oops. So, oh, yes, I guess there are our logos. And so, NSA has been called many things recently. I might describe NSA first and foremost as a technology organization. And indeed, one of the reasons I'm here today is to talk about why we open source things. One is for technology transfer. If there's a particularly new piece of software or technology that we wish to commercialize or at least share with everyone, we have a process for that. And I'll show some examples in the next slide. Another one is technical tools, say for folks running networks. We want to get those out to administrators of all national security systems and indeed for the wider federal audience. And open source is often a great way to do that. So we have, and again, later slide will show a bunch of examples of that. And so big reason NSA open sources is to advance information assurance mission, which is our defensive mission, right? If you have a tool and you think it'll help defend networks, you want to be able to get it out there as widely as possible. And then another one is maximizing dissemination this way provides the best value to the taxpayer. If you're only providing it to little pockets of people here or there, it's just, it's bad ROI for the taxpayer for sure. And so here's an example of open source technology from NSA, open attestation for using TPMs to provide integrity measurements. Everybody's heard of SE Linux, I think. Thanks also for that mention, Paul, earlier. NiFi is now in the Apache Foundation. It's for doing network flows, or managing network flows. It stands for Niagara Files. Get it? And everybody's probably, half the phones in the room may very well have SE for Android code running on them that confines apps in a way that was much more powerful before that access control system was in place. SIMP is, along with SCAP Security Guide, helps folks who run operational networks make sure they're in compliance. And Red Hawk is software-defined radio stuff. And some of these while most of those are for information assurance, some of them may have an obvious intelligence mission or be driven by intelligence requirements. But still, open source is often the best way to maintain that kind of software, and it may have wider uses. And Cumulo, of course, is for doing cell-level privacy in databases, which is important for privacy and constraining access. So, and OSM widget framework, of course, you may have seen on your screen at some point. And so these are open source technology examples from us. And they've been shared in a variety of ways, whether it's direct to industry or whether it's to GitHub or to some other repository. And so also we have a variety of tools that we've put on our external web presences, which is actually the next slide. One example is control flow integrity, which is a forward-looking vision for how microprocessors, if they implement a few extra instructions, could put an end to memory corruption exploitation. And there's proof of concept stuff up there on IAD's GitHub site. A lot of this is for not Red Hat's platform, but for other platforms like AppLocker for application whitelisting type things, and certificate authority, situational awareness, since it's very important for everybody out there to have all the tools they could possibly use to defend their networks. Maple Syrup is for assessing ARM CPU security features. Grass Marlin is for industrial control system situational awareness. Pass the hash tools, that's a problem for some single sign-on systems. Pass the hash is a problem for some single sign-on systems that allows adversaries to move laterally across the network, and so we've provided some tools on the site to help people with that, along with event forwarding guidance. Go Secure is a Raspberry Pi implementation for a VPN, also Linux-based, of course. That was a part of a prototyping effort we've got to deliver secure solutions in a very quick time frame that leverage open source as much as possible, and lock levels for assessing operationally implemented mitigations on systems. So these are, and LockOff is a tool for cyber situational awareness that I still need to learn more about to see if it's in line with our strategy for standards and that kind of thing. But that's a rapidly developing space. Oh, sure. And so we have a variety of open source presences. Of course, our Information Assurance Directorate, where I work, I think was one of the earliest ones to get a site on GitHub. And for all of you who also live in bureaucracies, it did take more than a few months to get all of the policy and legal sorted out for us to be able to have that presence up there. And then a little bit later, the overall agency got one for itself. SIMP is another project that was developed in our technology directorate that develops deployment tools to help with compliance. And then on the bottom left, Red Hawk software-defined radio software also has its own presence. And then on the top right is something that's of great interest to me these days, which is revamping common criteria evaluations, which had started to take, for the last few years, an incredibly long time, and the requirements didn't necessarily address contemporary threats. And so first we started by saying we really can't have evaluations take more than 180 days max, and they should be targeted at 90 days. They really should contain, and the requirements should only be for features that really address threats we care about. And then along those lines, to make the requirements documents move a lot faster and to involve community effort as much as possible, we went ahead and got the approvals necessary to put it on GitHub directly. So we have, I want to say, at least a dozen, if not more, protection profiles up there. And indeed, we're even working directly with your Steve Grubb on developing a new one for labeled security that would enable newer style evaluations of features like SE Linux. So in conclusion, NSA actively open sources lots of stuff. I would suggest that your government organization is probably doing something that you might think about. Come on in, the water's fine.
All right. Well, thanks, Jeff, and thanks everybody. So, in the spirit of the power of participation, I would love to get some audience participation with questions for these guys. So, if you think of something, raise your hand. We have some folks running around with microphones. We're video recording this, so we want to make sure we get your question on air. But while you guys think of questions, I have a question for you guys. We could throw this around. Maybe we'll start with Chris, but. I don't know if Mike Haramis is here. He's the CTO of DHS. He presented yesterday at the Executive Exchange. I don't know if he is somewhere else, but it was an interesting quote that I wrote down from him that he said yesterday. So he was talking about like open source in the context of government agencies, and he's saying that releasing open source is one thing, but agencies need to know how to develop communities. And he said Red Hat is good at this, but a culture shift is really needed. So I totally agree with him that it's like you don't want to just do like a code bomb and stick something up on GitHub and declare mission accomplished. Yeah. So for each of you guys, maybe, and again we'll start with Chris. How do you build that culture and how do you make sure that once you put the code out there, do you need to actually budget for community maintenance and cultivation and because I could imagine if you look at the pie chart of how much time somebody has to spend on engineering versus community culture cultivation, you could actually flip that over time to so you're spending less time writing code and by getting more people to join a community.
Yeah, creating the community, that's hard.
Yeah.
It is not easy stuff. We had hoped, first we're very naive at first. We'll put it out there and we'll get all these people jumping in. It just doesn't organically happen like that. So I think from our perspective, especially for an organization to do it, there does have to be people engaged. It's a lot of marketing efforts, too, of how to get people, steps like, okay, here's some ways you could start, doing that. And also I think we always talk about code contributions. Non-code contributions. Let's get feedback, let's get bug reports, let's get kind of little papers describing where you want things to go. I think that's one thing that a lot of people often overlook, and that's where we benefited probably the most. We get some code contributions of the time, which you can get, but getting that non-code has been very helpful for us. So.
Yeah, and I know, Jeff, you've seen that firsthand with the SCAP Security Guide where you'd love a pull request, right?
Yeah.
But a bug report works just as it's the next best thing as opposed to just people being quiet about stuff. But how do you see that from developing that culture with, say, like the SCAP Security Guide?
You're absolutely right, and we call it commercialization.
Yeah.
Right? Because as part of our tech transfer process, there are very explicit questions asked, like, so why do you want to open source this? What are your plans? What industry partner are you working with?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I think we actually have that culture established, at least, that's run by our research directorate in coordination with our information assurance directorate with regard to getting tools and technology out there. Mm-hmm. It's explicitly part of the process and is even written down in the process itself. Okay. So that's a great point.
Okay. Amitabh, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, for me it was it's a new thing. Health system is traditionally very conservative. We have lots of regulations, and so for me it was a 1-year process to work with our lawyers to kind of figure out how do we actually take the code and release it. But not only just in terms of intellectual property, but also the liabilities that you may incur. And that's an important one, especially for a faculty standpoint. A question that faculty often has is, can I use this without encumberment? And that's an important deal. They want to know what's the story for them. Can they use it or not? And the other facet is, can I build upon this and not get sued for intellectual property, right? So all of those are important ones. And so we decided to use Apache software license. And it does help you with indemnification. There is a set of lawyers who are going to help you if you get sued for patents. So there are things that are really important, but it also is important to not run too fast because you have to stay with your culture. And it's an important one. It's a cultural shift, and we're still learning.
Yeah, because I can imagine, Chris, like at an integrator or in the government or in academia, there's always like, oh, we can't let our intellectual property out. Right. That's why we're here. And it's like, and so how did you have to do a lot of selling to your management to get them to buy off on it?
Really first it was like education. As part of that buy-in, it starts like, how do we educate people, leadership in our organization to say, okay, this makes sense. I mean, we just invested all this money in this. You're going to give it away? That's puzzling at first. But like I said earlier, we pushed back. We use examples of Red Hat, but as like, hey, this can work, this makes sense, here's the differentiator it gives us, here's how it helps our clients. And it just took that education, and after a while, once people started using it and downloading it, it's like, this makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, it really changed things. And it also does, you know, for us too, it's a branding thing. It's hard to get the message out. Like, we can say, oh, we have cloud people. You know, we're doing these cool things with service brokering. Well, show us. Okay, let's build something. Here we show you, we understand all the issues. We've built through this. We can talk about, like, why did you build this? Well, 10 clients said this, and this is why. And so it gives you very much, especially with that trend, even in RFPs and proposals now for government work, is like, don't just tell us about it, build something. Yeah. So this gives us that base we can work off of. Yeah.
Okay. Who has the first? We got a question over here.
Thank you for sharing this so openly. I think one of the first things I'd like to see open source is, Amitabha, your slide of the Swiss Army knife. And the point of that knife really is, it's not just about software, it's about the whole organization.
Yes.
And we were one of the first ones to come up with cloud brokering. And we wrote the software first, and then we said, no, that's not what we should do. We'll just, open source will create it. It took about 4 years. Mm-hmm. So hopefully now with all of this coming, there'll be much faster innovations everywhere. So I want to ask each of you, what are the areas that you're seeing open innovation happening? In IoT, for instance, we do a lot of playing with it, but everybody's trying to build their own ecosystem. And at some point in time, we're going to have to determine which way to go. Or will it be open source? So each of you, what are the big areas that you see open source benefiting from that maybe we haven't seen yet?
Sure, so I can start.
Could be organization.
Yeah, I think we're seeing it now is a lot around data and the handling of data and the transport and the wrapping of data and the integration of systems like you're showing today. I'd like to see that. We have a lot of clients that are involved in that. Also, the networking side, you know, we've been talking a lot about that, and that's kind of pushing down those layers in that. You know, we want to create that abstraction. We're always anxious to automate it, and we kind of run into these obstacles. Open sourcing that and coming up with these common platforms for that is something I think we see a bunch of. I'd like to see IoT for sure. You know, I'd like to definitely see a lot more in there. The different platforms and proprietariness of that is causing some trouble for us at times. Yeah.
For me, I think if you look at the stack and with the emergence of cloud, there's a need for a cloud operating system, right? It's a distributed operating system. So that's what is happening. If you're seeing that trend where containers and orchestrations, all of those are coming together so that we, as the consumer on top, don't have to worry about these things. And I'm glad, for one, that Red Hat is working on that and other people like Chris are actively working on that. For us, it's about the data to find cure. And every dollar that we don't spend on storage or on orchestration is dollar that we have for finding the next cancer drug. And so we want to differentiate on our research and not on the technology. And that's where we are wanting to participate in a community where we can get some of these things. And as a part of doing research, if we have things that we built we didn't find somewhere else, we would be happy to share it, because if every other university started doing it, every other organization started doing it, then we would also benefit from that process. So it's the compounding effect of this participation, that everyone coming in with their stuff and then leveraging the giant shoulders on which we stand. I think that would be the important one for us.
I guess there are probably two I'd mention, one of which is really sexy and one of which isn't. The one that's really sexy is data analytics for cyber defense, right? Bringing in a whole bunch of data points from across the network about events that are occurring to know if an attack is in progress, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of that we're doing in partnership with DHS and NIST to develop open standards along those lines that I think will be prototyped and expressed in open source ways. The one that we're working a lot on that unfortunately isn't as sexy has to do with the government developing basic IT security requirements and getting so that products can quickly be evaluated and given a stamp that says, yes, we know this product has at least a set of features. They've been given some basic evaluation, good to go, which is really only possible even with some classes of product. Things in the cloud are moving too fast, right? DevOps. What are you going to do? The developer's going to ops, right? So, but to the extent possible, we do want to speed up any kind of evaluation processes, and we're leveraging open source to speed that up as much as possible.
Could I add one more, David?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's more on not a technology, but a process, because this is a government room. And we do a lot of work at Booz Allen for a lot of government clients. I wish, and I know there's some movement in this, but I wish we could take portions of that aren't sensitive and push back to the community. That would be a huge transformation for us.
Yeah. Okay. Who's next? Got another question over here.
So you'll get this question probably. We have all this open source. We have all this open data. We have this transparent connectivity. We can get to everything. So now how do we manage who should have access and who should not? And how strong is the trust that you have when you start opening up these very large data sources for the strength of the authentication? So proving who should be there is authorized to be there.
So I think, Amitabh, you have that problem solved.
Solved is a strong word. This is a governance problem, and governance is different forms of governance. You could have local governance, as in the projects that we do at the university, and then we have delegated governance, where we send our request up to Mayo, and then it filters down to all the network nodes in the network. But the point here is that a lot of people conflate security with governance. And so I feel like, at the infrastructure level, if you have the right controls in place, that you've set it up so that you don't have to, for every single project, do that over and over again, and then let a policy layer that allows the person or a set of committee to manage who gets access or not, is then a policy decision and a policy ascription. The other thing is you need powerful ways to describe these assertions. It's not perfect. An example in our world is there is regulations that if your data is being used in a project, and we call this secondary use, and then you have projects that feed from this other project, like you have derivative data. Now, if I, as a patient, come in and say, I want to retract my data, so it's like you have the sweater and you want to take the wool and put it back on the sheep. So we don't have a framework for that, but we are thinking of issues like that.
I'll go next. This is an incredibly complicated question, and as much as it's a governance question, we also see it as a technology question. And one of the things we're focused on these days is how you identify the individual user. DoD, of course, has, I think, the largest public key infrastructure in the world, commonly backed by the common access card that you see DoD people carrying around for identity. So one of the challenges, of course, is how do you make that work with a mobile device? Right? You may see some people have a CAC reader duct taped to the back of their phone, right? That's really, it's not just bad for usability, it's also bad for security, because they're just not going to use it, right? Or if they are using it, they're just using it to read an email, which they'll then send unencrypted as soon as they can, so they don't have to use the darn thing again, right? And so, the NIST has done special publications for derived credentials and trying to get those cryptographic credentials stored on the device in a secure way. And then paired with that often is do you use biometrics to allow unlocking and access to those credentials? So, and then of course, how does the system itself ensure that if it becomes compromised, an attacker can't then export those credentials and masquerade as that user from somewhere else? And that's just one set of problems on the end user device end. There's also the whole set of problems on the back end with regard to processing assertions and how do you make a policy decision based on the request coming in. So a very rich question with very many rich problems.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with these guys. You kind of covered a lot of that. We've got some applications for virtual security stacks that kind of try to centralize and manage all the data and applications. A lot of different ways to approach it.
Yeah.
Another project that we've been working on is called Project Glovebox. And the idea here is that we're using virtual desktop technologies to give researchers access to the data, but it doesn't actually leave the envelope. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty useful thing for us.
Yeah, just on top of that, so very similar, we've been working with some research facilities too. So instead of like transmitting all the data, you just submit your algorithm. Mm-hmm. Let the processing, we'll do the results, we'll test it, and we'll give you the results back, but we keep the data there instead of sending that back for you to do your research work.
Yeah, and it's oftentimes it's much more efficient to send an algorithm than to send a petabyte to where the algorithm is.
Yes. Yeah.
So I know we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that you guys have time to get to the next session. And so I'm going to ask these guys a closing lightning question, and I'll let them think about it before they answer. But if you guys were going to, and you guys pull your phones out and you could tweet this, but if these guys were going to tweet one thing you said today, what would it be? And we'll start with Chris, but before you guys think about it, give you a second. So while these guys think about it, I want to make sure that this is more than just an annual event. The whole thing with Power of Participation, it's not just like a one-time-a-year thing that we come here and we do this. We have events going on all the time, and I wanted to bring to your attention a couple of them that we have going on in the very near future. So next month we have, I don't know if you've been to DevNation earlier in the week, but we have DevNation Federal, and it's going to be in the DC area on July 28th. We got the website, the agenda already up. So think of it as the greatest hits of DevNation, but it's in the DC area and it's a free event. So please check that out. The other thing is on October 6th, we have Defense in Depth, and I think this is the fourth time we've done this. As you guys know, October is National Cybersecurity Month, so hopefully you're getting your cards and putting a tree up and all that stuff for that. So in celebration of that, we always do Defense in Depth, and that is, again, sort of like the greatest hits of the Red Hat Summit of all the security talks that we've done. And we're going to have engineers come in to present, and we're going to do hands-on labs, and it's going to be really, really good. And then lastly, on November 2nd, we have the Red Hat Government Symposium. And so those two events are, they're in the planning phases right now, and so what I really encourage you guys to do is follow Red Hat Gov, and we'll be letting you know when those events are going on. And with all that too, it's like I want to make sure that you guys are reaching out to your Red Hat counterparts as well, reaching out to me as well. With all of these guys on stage here, and many of you in the room, we've been very fortunate to have such deep relationships with you all. And I am personally very thankful of that. I know that Red Hat is a better place because of you guys, and my life is better because of you guys. So I want to thank you for all that. So with that, let's flip one more slide, and we'll do our lightning question. So Chris, if people were going to tweet one thing you said today, what would that be?
Yeah, so I like seizing these opportunities, and I'm here in San Francisco on stage, right? So I think it'd be remiss if I didn't do something like Booz Allen, Red Hat, open source that makes the world a better place.
All right.
For my Silicon Valley reference.
Nice. Okay. Amitai.
All right. Join your open science comrades to fight disease. We need you. #MadBus.
All right. Okay. Jeff?
Open source is often the most effective way for NSA to share tools and technology with customers and partners.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you, guys. Let's give these guys a round of applause, and I want to thank you all for coming. All right.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, that was fun. I've got one funny thing to put on the back of that. It's not political. This is apolitical. But a lot of you might have seen in the news last week that George Will left the Republican Party. And he said the one benefit that one of the politicians has over him is that he can't speak in 140 characters or less. So that's a real challenge that Dave always sticks on his panelists, and you guys did a great job with that. Thanks for attending. We'll see you guys at the next event.